Dr. Renee Irvin from University of Oregon here. We also have our accreditation coordinator or director, sorry about that. Also Stuart Mendel, and he serves as executive director of National Center for Nonprofit Enterprise. And we also have Dr. Matt Hale, who helped really get this whole accreditation off the ground and has been a really important force for NACC Accreditation, our former NACC president, Matt Hale from Seton Hall University. We're gonna pull up a PowerPoint in just a moment and we'll get started. And I just wanna also let you know that you're welcome to put any questions that you have in the chat box. We will have a time for discussion towards the end of the webinar as well. And we're really thankful that you've all joined us through this webinar. And thank you to Nicole Hoyer, who is just really instrumental on all the administrative side of this webinar. So Matt, we'll pull up the PowerPoint for you in just a second.
I'll just say to start, I also wanted to make sure we thank Heather for spearheading this this webinar effort. I think it's a great thing for NACC to do on a variety of different topics, and Heather really was the guiding force behind making it happen, as well with Nicole and Renee. But thanks to everybody.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, can you see it? Can everybody see it, the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Is that your first slide, Matt?
That's it right there.
All right.
So I'm going to be brief, and we'll let Stuart and Renee go a little bit longer. I'm just really here to give you some background on the NACC accreditation, where it came from, how we got here. So my earliest memory is at a NACC conference in Chicago before we all went drinking. We decided that there was a lot of excitement in the room about doing some sort of accreditation process. And we just sort of put heads together and said, let's start this. Let's start thinking about how we might go about doing an accreditation process, what it might look like. And so we jotted some things down on a board and took it off from there. The first sort of big step in the development of this, in 2016, we held an accreditation summit at Texas A&M over the summer. We had about 50 or 60 people from around the country, a lot of sort of leaders in the field talking about whether or not accreditation was a good idea. We had topics on trying to identify and understand what we really meant by nonprofit and philanthropy first, with the idea of focusing whatever accreditation process was going to happen around making sure that it was centered in nonprofits and philanthropy, because there wasn't one of those. So what might that look like? We had a panel on diversity and critical perspectives. We had accreditation best practices. What can we learn from the way that others do it? And then we sort of had a sharing the sandbox, where we talked about exactly what other accreditation processes were out there, particularly AASB and obviously NASPA, social work as well. So there was a number of those in the sharing the sandbox. What would that eventually look like? We talked about international accreditation, what is possible in terms of having international accreditation. And then we came up with sort of some next steps. Those next steps took about 2 years. We spent a lot of time discussing and doing some more discussing. And that was both sort of from a practical perspective of, making sure that we had all the ideas out on the table, and that NACC had the capacity as an organization to take something on like this. We did paper presentations at Arnova, paper presentations at NASPA. Some of those were well received, some of them were not. But we started getting the idea out into the field. There was a special edition of JNEL, which came out during that time frame. And we also had to do some sort of bylaws revisions, or at least tweaks of our bylaws, to see how this might work as an organization. And eventually we decided that we were gonna move ahead, and we were going to try and do a NACC accreditation, which sort of started in earnest in 2019, and then through the year that was 2020. So if we could go to the next slide. There we go. So there's another slide after that, I think.
Am I going forward or backwards?
Or going forward.
Obviously. All right, is that it?
There we go. Okay, thank you. So that whole process sort of came up with some key and central frames. Those frames are what I believe has guided us, and what Stuart and Renee are going to talk about, how well we've sort of met these ideals and frames. The first one is that whatever process that was going to happen, we needed it and wanted it to be curriculum centered. That stems from the idea of the NACC curricular guidelines, which are sort of the calling card of NACC in many respects, and are in some ways have been a de facto way that the field has grown. And so we wanted to center whatever accreditation process we were doing around those curricular guidelines. We also made sure and wanted to make clear that we didn't have an idea of where nonprofits ought to be. So we had to be flexible and agnostic about the home and the form of the programs, because the nonprofit education enterprise is so diverse. It happens in so many different places, and we wanted to try and make a accreditation process focused on nonprofits and philanthropy, regardless of where it was delivered. And so we wanted to make sure that if you were in a business school or a public administration school or a standalone school or wherever, that eventually you could go and be a part of the accreditation process. We had an underlying sort of concept that we didn't want to have we didn't want to have must-haves, like you must have this in order to be accredited. We wanted to, again, in part because of the diversity of the field, that we wanted to focus more on proving what you have, and explaining to us exactly, explaining to the accreditors exactly what you are attempting to do. We had a big push that any accreditation process needed to be relatively low cost with a reasonable commitment of time and effort. We didn't want it to be we wanted there to be some effort required and some significant self-reflection and on the program and the people running it, but spending years on it and hiring consultants to get you through it was not something that we thought would be good for the field. Ultimately, the goal is really centered around truth in advertising. The goal of the NACC accreditation is to explain what you do within the field, who is doing it, and I'll make a quick point that we're agnostic in about whether or not it's tenured or practitioners. We think there's a valuable role for both in any accreditation process. In terms of what you do, we recognize that there are nonprofit programs that focus in a very specific area and are designed to do very specific things, and that's okay. You don't have to be one size fits all. You can be you. We do expect that any of the accreditation process, that you map what you do to the curricular guidelines and what you do to the needs in the field, and tell us a little bit about who's coming to your program in terms of background. So really the goal is sort of this self-reflection idea and making sure that what you are doing, that you show us, that you show the world, in essence, that you have are delivering on what you say you're delivering on with the truth in advertising. So with that, it's been a long process. It's we think that we've come up with a program that Stuart is going to talk through and talk about, that meets these goals and meets these frames. And we hope it continues. We hope that more and more schools are interested in it, and that in doing it, and that it helps grow the field. And that's really sort of the bottom line. So with that, why don't I turn it over to Stuart, and you can take it from here.
Okay. Let me just, I went too far. You know, I got a trigger finger here on my PowerPoint. All right. Hi, everybody. So I know a number of you have been through this explanation already, but I'm seeing there's some new people in the webinar, so that's great. Hopefully, I'm not going to say anything that contradicts what Matt just shared. All of his background information is posted to the website, and you'll see that on the top of this slide. If you go to the NACC website and you click on accreditation, the background information and the lineage of events that he described is there, plus all the documentation. So rest assured, this process and concept has been well thought out. Well, it's been well debated and more or less agreed upon. And the reason that we're calling the first go around, first period, a pilot, is because you know, we're learning as we're doing it. And our approach is one of collaboration. If you know me at all, you know I believe in that, and I believe in partnership. So what we designed is conceptually intended to help build the field. So the field we don't see as this draconian must be anyway. I mean, you heard Matt say it, we really believe that as a value. So all we're trying to do through this process is to see if people are using the NACC curricular guidelines, how they're using it, is what they're advertising, what they're actually doing, and are the programs some that we can give our imprimatur to. And if you understand what NACC is, that's a big deal because people volunteer to do this organization, to be a part of it, and they see value, and that's why they're here. So all we have really is our credibility. So that's really the message we're conveying to you when we give you that certificate and we post your organization and your school and your program on our website. So the purpose of the accreditation hopefully is clear to everybody. And it is evolving.
Stuart, could I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure, David, go ahead.
Isn't there a national body that accreditates the accreditors? And are we pushing towards that, or where are we in that stance?
So maybe you want me to try that, Stuart?
Go ahead, sure.
Yes, it's called CHIA. I don't really know what CHIA stands for, which tells you how far we are in the process of getting CHIA accredited. So there is an accrediting body of the accreditors. To put it in perspective, my understanding is that NASPA existed for 10 years before it applied to be a part of CHIA. And so we are not at this point sort of actively moving in that direction because, as Stuart said, this is a collaborative and partnership process as we develop. Eventually, yes, that is something that I think we would go towards, but I don't think that that's a rush of where we're headed at this point. Right.
So the only thing I'd add, David, to that is that there's no crisis generating this. There's no urgent, you must create an accreditation program from nonprofit management programs. We're concluding that it's a good idea. We're trying to build consensus. So in the absence of a lever to force us to do it, we're taking our time. And actually, just to correct Matt's history, this conversation that I became aware of actually started in Chicago in 2011. And at the time, there was a presentation about what an accreditation could be. And basically, the lesson for us is we can create whatever we choose as long as we're consistent with it and we document and we have a structure to it. So, we left that meeting with, well, duh, and then 5 more years of trying to figure it out. So this is a long time process, and it's going to continue. So let me just get back to the bullet points because I hadn't intended to talk this long. So basically, the process is getting faster. The first year we did it, we had 10 applicants, and it was overwhelming. So it took a whole year. And in fact, Arizona State's took over the year because they were the last one to get all their data in, but they are part of that first cohort, but it took a year. Last year, this past year, year 2, these are my mittens, I'm really cold. Year 2, I was able to do 2 projects in 2.5 months each. And that was waiting for people to get back to us from the institutions. So we can do this fairly quickly if the accrediting school, the applying school, has the materials organized and is willing to meet with us and talk. The fee was $2,400 for one program. We hadn't really thought through undergraduate program accreditation, but one school asked us to look at their undergraduate program, and we gave them a twofer, which was $2,800 for the 2 programs. So that's about the magnitude of it. The process includes, there's a committee structure, there's intake that occurs, but there is a kind of, I guess, journal type, academic journal type reviewers, blind reviewers that look at the academic programs and the materials we give them. Then there's a committee that we share the information with and ask their views and the process, and then the board president of NACC. And then the process concludes and there's a conversation with the academic program about what our thoughts are. We try to take into account everything that people share with us. But we really stick to just the curricular guidelines. The real measure is, these are the categories, map the courses, and we'll check them out. Really, it's that simple. The types of feedback that we've been getting, because we ask, because this is a collaborative process, and we don't want surprises on either end, our end or their end, your end, is that the act of reviewing mission statements, structure, the marketplace, experience, the needs of their students, the needs of their institutions, going through that process is extremely valuable. And we're not in a position to judge it. We just want them to explain it to us. So my understanding, and maybe, Renee's been through this, so she might have an opinion she could share too, but by asking people the questions and not judging the answers other than this is how it fits and this is what you do, and the programs themselves actually make that analysis. At that point, I'm just a scribe. So we find that if programs are going to innovate, that innovation can take root during this process. But again, it's not an innovation that we impose, it's one that gets explained to us. So I'm going to go back to this concept, though. The reason that we're doing this, the reason I'm doing this, that I have an interest in it, is the field building. I've been part of the field for, I can't believe it, maybe 25 years already. I can't believe that. But basically, I've been always curious about why all the public administration and business administration people publish in the nonprofit journals. And if you're trying to do scholarship from the perspective of a nonprofit actor, I'm sure you all know that you must take that into account. And in real life, where you're practicing some of these skills and you're dealing with, you're interacting with a funder, a grant maker, a government agency, a policy maker, they are not, their view of the world is not the same as yours. And, because of the role that I've had traditionally in my college, I get presented with these management dilemmas by students, people in the community, and you know, the answers tend to be based on experience, not on the scholarship or the theory. So in my view, driving an accreditation has to address some of that, at least as an outcome that I could then use to point to strengths of the field, distinctiveness of nonprofit sector studies, the pedagogy. And when my understanding, I wasn't actively engaged in NACC when the curricular guidelines were drafted, but in reading through the scholarship and the thinking that went into them, you know, a lot of what I just described to you are bedrock concepts, people that already bought in to nonprofit first, they just weren't calling it that. So I have a little bit of scholarship to share with you, and then I'll yield the floor to Renee, and then maybe we can do Q&A. But so I am writing a chapter in a book on nonprofit management innovation. And what I had, there's 16 graduate curricular guidelines, 16 subject areas. It's overwhelming to look at all of them and parse the detail of how all the programs teach. So I picked one. I picked leadership, because leadership is this thing that everybody's been talking about since before there was a nonprofit sector officially recognized. So of the programs that we looked at, there are 11 institutions. Let me just get rid of this. I can't see. There are 11 institutions. The term leadership is in the academic unit name and for 3 of them. Leadership is in the degree name for 5 of them. Leadership is in the mission statements for 9 of them. There are over 30 courses entitled leadership, 17 of which are required courses. And all of these courses, all of these programs have some kind of service learning or capstone. So I'm sure that's obvious, but I haven't seen that written anywhere. Perhaps it is. I haven't done any deep research on this, but this is current data samples that give us kind of a snapshot of where the field is for leadership courses and that concept. So the next little deeper dive is a table in this chapter that I'm writing about the mission statements of each academic program. And there are 11, and most of them either refer to use leadership, leader something specifically, deliberately, or they allude to it in their titles. So, you know, these are nonprofit management programs, and the term leadership is a prominent part of their ethos. Then the last piece, I think that was it. There's another table, I didn't include it. Then the last piece has to do with the textbooks for leadership courses. And it's bewildering and bewildering. You can't point to a single book that everybody uses as the canon for the field. And most of the courses, when you dig down and look at the syllabi, they teach leadership with different emphases, with different themes. And, you know, this is an area for us, I think, to really look at. Leadership's one of the subjects there's like hundreds of thousands of nonprofit leadership articles and pieces if you do a Google search. So it's not like we haven't been talking about this for a while. So I raised this particular illustration because I think all of these concepts, everything that I've just described to you, applies to the other 15 NACC curricular guideline categories. And I would leave it at that and hope that piques your interest. I think maybe for the remaining slides, I'll circle back around at the end and talk a little bit about my organization, but this is a NACC meeting, so let's take it from there.
I think Renee has some slides to share too, Stuart.
All right, am I sharing hers too?
No.
Okay, there you go. I stopped sharing. Okay.
Thank you very much, Renee.
there. So I assume you can all see that, right? Okay. Now, if you have a comment to make or a question, just call out because I can't see people very well because I'm got you minimized. All right, so let's go through this. To start out, I want to tell you that I'm very familiar with accreditation systems from in other fields. I directed our accreditation effort the last time our Master of Public Administration was accredited and was involved in the prior 2 accreditations. And also in my work as Associate Dean, I worked closely with the planning program master's degree in their accreditation, and also observed architecture and art accreditations. And they're all, and through this process also, I'm very, I'm aware of how extensive the business school accreditation process is as well. So these are very different from what NACC has to say. So here are my remarks as somebody who's been through this, all this other stuff. I do love those mittens, Stuart. And I heard it was a little bit cold on the East Coast today. So, all right. So step 1, I'm just going to go through it as sequentially, is that we paid the fee. Maybe that's the hardest part, is getting your budget office to loosen their grip on the budget and pay the $2,400 fee. We provided NACC with our mission statement, a very, very easy, very quick program description that could basically be lifted from your website. We provided them with some numbers on our students, enrolled students, number of graduates, etc. And then very important was an involved faculty list, both tenure track and adjunct or practitioner faculty. Anybody who essentially regularly taught courses in the program. So for us, it was our Master of Nonprofit Management program. We next provided them with a zip drive with syllabi of all the recorded and elective course, required and elective courses, which I split into 2 different sections of the zip drive. And then CVs of all the involved faculty members. I want to go back to syllabi for a moment. One of my adjunct faculty members had provided me with a syllabus, which I didn't look over too carefully. And it turns out her whole reading list and schedule for the quarter was in a completely different document that she had provided directly to the students. So make sure that all elements, all critical elements of the syllabi are right there. So I later, added that too, but for the external review board members, you want to make sure the syllabi have everything in it right there so they don't have to skip over to additional documents. We also, I was doing all the work behind the scenes at this point. Spreadsheet, we made a spreadsheet grid that showed the 16 curricular guidelines and then noted which courses it was either that way or was noting all the required courses and some key electives and where those fit into the guidelines. Anyway, it was a matter of just mapping those in X's in the boxes where they fit. Then we had an in-person Zoom interview with Stuart. And this is kind of interesting because I went into I know everything about the program, no problem. Just sit down and chat with Stuart for a few, half an hour or whatever. So Stuart asked me a number of questions, but when you talk with someone verbally, you sort of gather impressions as well as their answers. You may latch onto things that help you to sort of categorize a program. So Stuart talks, describes who's going through accreditation and what their emphases are, sort of quick takeaways. So what I labeled it in my mind was a micro narrative. So had I known that there would be a micro narrative coming out of this, I might have been a little more strategic in how I presented my verbal description to Stuart. But I mean, I have no problem with how he categorized us, but are very cognizant of how we're described in those little one-liners. And so anyway, all right, step 3. This was the hard work. So you had to take the curricular guideline and exactly map how your program fits into that and describe how it does. So sometimes this is really easy. It's like you have a dedicated course called board governance or a dedicated course called fundraising, and those easily map onto a guideline. Or you may end up, if it's something like ethics, in our case, we don't have a nonprofit ethics course, but we explore the topic, you know, tangentially in a lot of other courses. So you don't have to cover all 16 curricular guidelines, and actually Matt and Stuart's discussions underlined that. However, the process sort of compels you to, and I'll describe why that is. First of all, it's not just dedicated courses that you can name as meeting the curricular guidelines, meaning that everybody has the same 16 courses. No, it's not that. It's these elements may pop up in your curriculum through a single course assignment, for example, or an external community engagement project that students undergo. So there's a lot of flexibility in documenting how you meet each curricular guideline. So it does take a while. I felt that, well, we have a robust program. It's nonprofit first. It's in depth, has a lot of depth and breadth. So I'm not worried about whether or not we're going to get accredited, and so therefore I'm not going to bother. You know, there are 3 or 4 curricular guideline categories, so it's like, you know, I could spend more time mapping this all out, but I'll quit here and just say that that's good enough, because each of the curricular guidelines has multiple subtopics, and it can just it can get very lengthy, this process. So I sort of backed off after a while. So that's enough. But I don't recommend that, actually, and I'll tell you more why. But next, the external review board takes all the materials and reviews it and gives their marks it all up. We don't know who they are. They're anonymous to us, and their results go back to Stuart, and then he conveys or at least that's how the process worked with me. It was quite iterative. We were really first in line. So Stuart, there was a lot of back and forth. And how do you like the way I've phrased this letter that goes to your provost or dean? And I'm like, yeah, that looks okay. And so there was some back and forth. And I would imagine that as time goes on, these procedures will be more codified, and you know, the verdict will come back without as much Stuart shaking his head. So you're welcome to comment if you want, Stuart. But I felt that I'm not saying that it'll be more inflexible in the future. I'm just saying that there will be probably established formats for presenting the results. Anyway, so we're accredited. We get a logo. We get the letters to send up to our upper level administrators, etc. So my critique is that let me pull this out of the way so I can read my slide exactly. This is the wording. Your program has met the standards in an X of 16 curricular guidelines. So it makes it sound like you're deficient in those remaining 4, like you failed the last 4 or something like that. So that to me is something I don't want to put up to my dean or my provost. People zero in on numbers. No matter what words are there, people will always look at percentages as sort of the end result. So a simple fix for that is just don't say of 16 curricular guidelines, just say, for example, the University of Oregon unambiguously meets X of the major content subject areas, and we note 6 areas or whatever, 8 areas of particular depth and emphasis or something. You don't have to say of 16. That's an easy fix. Let's see. I mentioned the cost was $2,400. So the lack of a site visit in the era of a pandemic, we're not so freaked out by the lack of a site visit, right? So now we kind of understand we can get a lot done without a site visit. But then 2 years ago, it's like, no site visit. Site visits are useful for really, I mean, things are revealed during a site visit that may not be revealed in the paperwork, in the data, et cetera. So I'm sympathetic to that argument, but does it reveal that much more that it really changes the outcome? I'm not convinced that it is. In the meantime, it's like 2/3 of the cost, honestly, in terms of labor, in terms of cost of flying everybody out. The logistics are horrendous. And I speak from experience with prior accreditations. So in terms of my workload, just to do the whole report, do the curricular guideline mapping, et cetera, I took about a half of a quarter system release, a couple credits basically, to prepare the material. And that's less than a semester course release. So it's not that horrible. So Stuart mentioned that this process is beneficial for us. And honestly, no matter who you talk to in whatever sector, nobody thinks that they need management assistance, right? Nobody. They think they're doing a fine job. So, however, the process forces you to do certain things, and going in depth into course assignments, not just comparing syllabi, but really course assignments. What exactly are you covering here and here? And I found some redundancies. For example, the faculty member teaching our nonprofit management class, which is kind of an opener to the whole program, was actually covering a lot, some very fundamental stuff from the fundraising class and from our philanthropy grant making class. So I had to ask her to sort of back off that in order to give her more time to really cover the management and leadership concepts. So there's that tendency, and even financial management, she's moving into that direction. So try to pull her back on that and really get her to concentrate on management and leadership. Second, I think our mission doesn't quite express how highly applied we are in terms of constantly pushing students out in practically every course to do projects with external agencies. And just things like that. It's like, this doesn't quite fit our mission statement. So it's going to be worth revisiting to make sure that's accurate. Third, there's a definite marketing advantage. So a couple of years have gone by, and I have students, incoming students and prospective students in particular, some of them do notice this. Many of them don't, but some do. And I have had actual questions from prospective students saying, what exactly does it mean that you're accredited by NACC? Other students will write it into their statement that, I noticed that University of Oregon's program is accredited and I value that. So that's interesting. Certain students, as they apply, are noticing that. Standing out from our competitors in general, I want to describe what you may be experiencing in your own region of the country or world, in that there's high, of course, growth of all sorts of nonprofit programs. And the whole emphasis of a nonprofit first curriculum is to really focus a spotlight on the fact that many programs are not nonprofit. They're not nonprofit in name only, or they're nonprofit with little nonprofit sprinkles on top, right? So you have universities out there that will have a degree program in some vague, I won't give an example because it might have been somebody with the title, but vague degree label, some sort of professional master's degree. And they'll say right there in their recruitment materials that it's excellent for professionals in the nonprofit sector, when in fact they have nothing there no nonprofit expertise amongst the faculty members, and no coursework that deliberately addresses the nonprofit context. That's worst case scenario. Second, and more prevalent actually, is a lot of master's degrees that are designed for other sectors, for professionals in other sectors, meaning folks who will be operating in the for-profit world and within the context of government. And those degree programs will be, they'll have the same degree program, but then they'll take their electives portion and then again, sprinkle a few nonprofit courses in there and then call it a full Master of Nonprofit, whatever. And that is not truth in advertising right there. That is a retrofit. So we're, in Oregon, we're competing against those types of programs as well. I don't have a problem so much as competing against nonprofit first focused graduate degree programs that are in development. They're still, their resources aren't quite there. They're almost, you know, I see them in a phase and they'll be really robust in the future, and that's okay. Legitimate competitor, but these other ones that are retrofits, they're all over the place. They're tacking nonprofit onto their degree name. And that's not good. And we definitely compete against those. So, you know, we can tell students to go and look at the curriculum, go look in depth at the curriculum, but sometimes honestly, it's not on their websites. They keep that rather hidden. So accreditation helps us stand out right there as well. So, all right, I encourage everyone to contact me. Also, I want to thank NACC for keeping a very streamlined, efficient process. This really zeroes in on the most important thing for our field right now, and that is truth in advertising. The robustness of the curriculum and the faculty teaching it. And I want NACC to keep it minimally burdensome and not go down the road of process happy, elaborate procedures that ultimately burden the faculty members. All right. No personal opinions right there, but feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer questions. And NACC is also super helpful. Every step of the way, every question I had, NACC, Nicole and others were always helpful in answering them. Thanks.
Great. Well, we have about 15 minutes left. I know we do have some statements, I think, from Stuart or Matt around what's next steps, the future of NACC accreditation. So Stuart or Matt?
Well, I see that Colton has just asked a question. So the templates, all the forms are on the website. Essentially, you're putting detailed information about your program. And I think it's a sequential approach. So you give us a form, we communicate back so that there's clarity and simplicity. So hopefully that answers your question, Colton. Matt?
Sure. I mean, you know, there's few things in this world that are less important than an ex-president. So let me start by saying that. So where the accreditation is going in the future, I think really does depend on both NACC's ability to market it and the demand that we're seeing from the community. And so, you know, we are learning, as Stuart said, as we go. We're learning about the field. There's a great coming explanations about how this process is sort of shaping and describing what the field is, and that's going to continue to sort of move us along. I think the underlying frames that I talked about at the beginning of and that Renee talked about at the end is that we are not in the interest of creating rubrics and models and universal competencies and along those lines, because the field just is so diverse, and really that at least at this point the focus is going to stay. I hope the focus is going to stay on the truth in advertising, and making sure that the programs that are recognized are ones that are actually delivering the goods, when it focuses on curriculum. So I think that we are going to continue to reach out. We're going to continue to encourage people to go through the process. We right now are generally focused on graduate programs with a nonprofit standalone graduate programs. At some point, we will most likely move into perhaps MPA or MBA programs in that area to see if that's something that is of interest to people. My sense is that when we move, or if we move into that area, to Renee's point, the 16 guidelines that Renee likes to get the A. So Renee was very focused on making sure that she was getting all of them checked. But I could see a situation where an MPA or an MBA with a concentration may actually not focus on that broadly. There may be other things that they choose to focus on, and so that what comes back is something about there are 6 or 5 or 4 or something along those lines in a different field. So I think that's another place that we might be moving. So
A question.
Renee.
When you talk about MBAs and MPAs, my impression is that we would have sort of a mini accreditation or certification or whatnot of specializations or certificates associated with any other master degree program. So we would not be in a position of accrediting an MPA or an MBA specifically. But yes, we might move into some sort of certification process of those certificates and specializations.
So I certainly think that we're not about to compete for the MPA market. That's going to be NASPA for a while. We're not about to compete with the MBA market. That's AASB for a while.
Right.
We have had conversations with NASPA about some partnerships. Sometimes they go well, sometimes they don't. About us being a part of their specialization process. But yes, I think that we would, as we would move beyond standalone programs, it would be in the specialization and certification accreditation more than the degree accreditation.
So Heather, I noticed Andrew asked a question too around the concept of virtual visits, and yeah, why not? In fact, I think we're all comfortable with them now. It's not such a foreign concept. Let's, sure. I think that would be my attitude.
I also imagine that the interviews that are coming up are going to be on Zoom rather than on a phone, right? I mean, they're, those are, so the existing interviews are my guess, going to be Zoomed, not telephone calls. But
I think Andrew had several other comments. So Stuart, Matt, or Renee, if you want to address them. One is regarding constructive feedback about program development.
Boy, he had quite a bit of time to type this. Sure, yes. I mean, I guess the concept is we want to be helpful, not create problems. So, one of my understandings has always been that the nonprofit academic programs, maybe with the exception of the Lilly Schools program, have to fight for space amongst more mature programs, and coming in with an accreditation that has any harsh recommendations, I think, is counterproductive. So, Renee suggested a few changes. I think they're great, easily implemented. Right now, my concept would be to share information with the program, ask them what they view, and really put the trajectory for the accreditation on very positive, helpful grounds. So, point of having the conversation informally is to clarify your context. I know programs that are in colleges of arts and sciences are different than those that are in schools of business. Degrees that are MSs are not the same as professional degrees that end with a terminal point to them. So all of that's got to be part of the ethos. So it's really, yes, the feedback would be consultative, I guess is the way I would share that.
I'll just chime in on the marketing aspect of it. I mean, Renee pointed right away that she feels that there are certain students that are attracted to the accreditation idea. We don't have statistics about the marketing angle. We don't have that in part because it's new, in part because there's there's not a huge number of programs that have gone through it. But we have had panels at various places with more than just Renee talking about it. That seems to be, accreditation seems to be of importance to not everybody. Certainly, not every student cares about it, but there are students that actually do care about it. The way that I would talk to deans about it now is there's nothing else in my field that this is unique for a specific nonprofit centered program. That there are if you are an MPA or a business MBA, you have another option, but this is the one for nonprofits, and that's something that seems to attract deans to some extent. So we would love to be able to show the marketing benefit, and love to be able to, but I think right now it's just informal talks with people who've gone through it, and my sense is that most of them say, yeah, we think it's helpful. The other way that it seems to be helpful, what we've heard is maybe not externally, but perhaps internally on your own campus. That if you are have an accreditation, you're seen by the rest of the campus, or seen by the provost sometimes as your status goes up internally, if not externally. So, but I would just encourage you to talk to people who've gone through it and see what they have to say. That's the best I can do.
Renee has a comment.
Yeah, a couple of comments is that Andrew mentioned virtual site visits, and I think that's definitely a can do now. Everybody's capable of doing that and participating in that right now. That would add a little more time and effort to the process, but still, I think it'd be fairly straightforward to pull off. Second of all, this is a personal experience with my dean. Actually was adamantly opposed to our going through accreditation purely on the basis of cost and workload. He was he's gone now. Yay. So, but he saw all the workload for these other accreditations associated with our college and just said, forget it. Not this year, not in 5 years. I'm just not, you don't need it, So I had to explain how straightforward it was. I had to tell him the cost was already covered internally by department funds, on and on. So I sort of had to slip it under past his barriers that he put up. So yeah, just to note that deans may be reluctant to support an accreditation process primarily on the basis of workload, which is interesting.
Sorry, can I just really briefly? In our case, it just happens to be that we're being asked to do something more onerous, a program review, a wholesale program review of our program, and so we're trying to kind of use this as kind of a substitute for it. And we're not getting any, support for doing it, but we're, it's just added to the workload. So the more that we can get out of the NACC process, the better it is for us in terms of our, just the internal kind of machinations of our, how our campus works.
Program reviews tend to be fixed at 10-year intervals on my campus at least, and they truly are something that's very difficult to maneuver out of. So my sympathies are with you. However, I think NACC can be flexible. For example, if you needed a process that was more elaborate and you wanted to pay a higher fee, maybe, I don't know, talk to Stuart, but
We'll work it out.
Yeah, we'll work. Hey, for you, my friend.
Let's talk. Let's talk.
So we're about at time. I do want to share a little bit of the fact that this is one of many webinars that we'll be doing, and this is recorded, and I apologize for not saying that sooner, but we will be sharing and posting this, so do want to come back and review it. But you can also reach out to Matt, Renee, Stuart, Nicole if you have any additional questions about NACC and or accreditation. Next month, so our webinars will run monthly, and next month, the first Wednesday of the month, we will be talking about trends in nonprofit academic programs and nonprofit education research, and specifically around global perspectives. So we have several researchers who study nonprofit academic curriculum and integrating global perspectives into that curriculum. The facilitators include Roseanne Marabella, Marco Tavani, and John Casey. So we hope that you can join us in future webinars. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much to our facilitators today. Thank you.